I want you to do something for me right now, if you can. Just close your eyes for a second.
Always a good way to start a deep dive.
Right. But seriously, imagine that the ground you are standing on isn't modern asphalt or concrete. Instead, you're stepping onto weathered limestone.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah, it's the stone that has been, worn smooth by centuries of footsteps. Imagine taking a deep breath and the air doesn't smell like car exhaust or a modern city. It smells like ancient Caribbean sea salt.
And if you listen closely, you can almost hear the echoes of languages from a 5-century-old ocean crossing just mingling in the air.
Exactly. It's an incredibly evocative image. And the amazing thing is, you don't need a time machine to actually experience that exact sensory landscape. You just need to walk through the colonial zone of Santo Domingo in the Dominican Republic.
Yeah, because we aren't just doing some virtual walking tour today. We are looking at the exact kilometer zero of an entire hemisphere.
We really are. We're diving into a great stack of sources today that detail the very foundations of this city. Our mission today is to look at Santo Domingo, not just as a capital, but as the exact place where the foundation of Latin American capitals began.
Right, the absolute starting point.
So I have to ask you, the listener, have you ever wondered where the underlying operating system for an entire hemisphere was first coded? Because this is it. Today, we're walking through that initial blueprint.
What's fascinating here is that Santo Domingo isn't just a stagnant historical site with a few dusty plaques. It operates as a breathing museum.
A breathing museum, yeah. I love that phrasing.
Because we are looking at the site of an unprecedented human experiment. It was the absolute collision of two worlds that, prior to this moment, had absolutely no idea the other existed.
And the encounter that played out on those limestone streets was, well, sometimes violent, sometimes negative, but fundamentally transformative for the entire globe.
It fundamentally changed human history. But, before we look at the standing architecture, the forts and the cathedrals and all that, we actually have to look at the ground itself.
The actual dirt.
Exactly. Because the sheer force of nature forced a complete redesign of the initial settlement. The story actually starts in the late 15th century, and not with Christopher Columbus, but with his older brother, Bartolome Colon.
Right, Bartolome. He founded the very first settlement on the eastern bank of the Ozama River.
He did, but the Caribbean environment is, it's incredibly unforgiving if you don't know how to navigate it.
Oh, absolutely, which they did not.
Not at all. So in 1502, a devastating hurricane completely obliterated the settlement.
Total destruction.
Total. We are talking about the kind of massive swirling storm that only the Caribbean can really engender. Those early precarious wooden and thatch constructions simply didn't stand a chance. Nature wiped them off the map in a matter of hours.
Okay, let's unpack this because the settlement gets destroyed, and then a new governor named Nicolas Ovando steps in.
Yes, Ovando.
And he rules with an iron fist, but he also has the vision of an urbanist. So he decides to move the city to the western bank of the river, which is more geographically protected.
But he doesn't just rebuild what was there. He implements what the sources call the demero, a strict chessboard or grid pattern.
The very first one in the Americas.
Right. And Ovando's grid was essentially the beta test, or like a V1.0 software for urban planning in the Americas that successfully scaled across an entire hemisphere.
It really was the blueprint.
But I have to push back slightly here. Was this grid strictly about organization, or was it a method of establishing control over a completely wild, unpredictable frontier? Because wouldn't those long, straight streets just create massive wind tunnels for the next hurricane?
From a purely aerodynamic standpoint, you might think so. But Ovando's grid wasn't about airflow at all. It was a psychological response to trauma.
Wow.
Yeah, it was absolutely about establishing control. Ovando wasn't just building a simple military camp. He was building something specifically to defy time.
To defy time. Exactly. It was a highly calculated response to the chaotic, random destruction of that 1502 hurricane. Nature had just proven it could wipe them out in an afternoon. So the grid was a way of imposing absolute human order on a landscape they found terrifyingly chaotic.
Like a physical statement.
Right. We are here, we are ordered, and we are permanent.
So they effectively placed a giant rational straitjacket over a completely untamed landscape. And it worked. Almost all Spanish-founded cities from Mexico all the way down to Patagonia, like Pizarro's design for Lima, they all use this exact same blueprint.
It is impossible to overstate how important this decision was. It became the default layout for civilization in the New World.
But, I mean, a grid is just lines drawn in the dirt. It provided order, sure, but order wasn't enough to guarantee survival.
No, not even close.
The physical buildings themselves had to adapt to the immense dangers of this new frontier. They literally had to mutate.
They did, and you see that mutation immediately. If you walk toward the entrance of the river today, the first thing that hits your vision is the Fortaleza Ozama.
Which doesn't even look completely man-made at first glance.
Exactly. Because it's built from local coralline rock, it looks like a massive porous stone sprouting directly out of the earth. It is the oldest standing European military construction in the Americas.
And the centerpiece of it is this imposing structure called the Torre del Homenage, the Tower of Homage.
Right. It was the ultimate symbol of power controlling access to the island and the whole Caribbean.
You just have to imagine the sheer paranoia of this era. You have these soldiers standing up there on that tower, sweating in heavy armor in the tropical heat, just constantly scanning the horizon.
Looking for pirate ships, corsairs, enemy fleets, you name it. This fort was the first link in a massive chain of fortifications meant to make the city completely impregnable.
And its massive walls held governors, famous prisoners, viceroys.
Yeah, viceroys who were essentially the absolute stand-ins for the King of Spain.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. Because if you look at the blueprints for the rest of the city, that paranoia wasn't restricted to the military forts. It bled into the spiritual life of the city, too.
Oh, absolutely.
If there is a single building that personifies the ambition and the sheer terror of that era, it's the Catedral Primada de America. But it doesn't look like what you'd expect. Doesn't this architectural mutation show just how vulnerable these early colonizers actually felt, despite their projected power?
Oh, entirely. If we connect this to the bigger picture, it reveals a profound truth about colonial expansion. You cannot simply drop a European society into a completely foreign, hostile environment and expect it to look the same.
Right, because when you think of a European cathedral, you think delicate flying buttresses, intricate stained glass, fragile spires.
Exactly, the postcard cathedrals. But the Catedral Primada is incredibly robust. It has these massive, thick walls and battlements. European architecture had to fundamentally change to meet the immediate survival needs of the population at that specific moment.
It's wild that even the house of worship had to be militarized.
It had to be. Order and faith were important, sure, but survival trumped everything. The church literally had to double as a physical refuge, a spiritual bunker, where the population could retreat during attacks.
And stepping inside that cathedral today is a trip. The forces describe it as being plunged into this golden penumbra where time just stops.
It's very atmospheric.
And for centuries, this fortress church actually held the remains of Christopher Columbus. Well, until they were moved to the Faro, the Colon, in the 90s. Though the mystery of where his true remains actually are still persists today.
It does. But, behind those heavy defensive walls, the inhabitants were desperately trying to build a functioning society. And because they were starting entirely from scratch, Santo Domingo has the highest density of historical primicias or firsts in the world.
The sheer number of firsts is staggering. Let's look at Calle de las Damas, which translates to the Street of the Ladies. It's the very first paved street in the New World.
Lined with these massive ancestral stone-carved mansions. And the legend behind it is fascinating. It's named because Diego Colón, the admiral's son, and his wife, the noble Doña María de Toledo, used to walk this street every single afternoon.
Right, with the ladies of the court all dressed in imported silk dresses, carrying delicate fans. It was the epicenter of high society elegance. I mean, it's basically the very first red carpet or VIP lounge of the Americas.
That's a great way to look at it, especially when you consider the Alcázar de Colón sits right near it. It's this unique architectural jewel mixing Spanish-era Mudéjar style with the Renaissance. The descendants of Columbus lived there, governing the nascent empire.
You can still see their tapestries and furniture there today. But shifting focus is a bit, there's an incredible irony here. Because just down the street from the silk dresses and the fans, you have the Hospital San Nicolás de Bari.
The first hospital in the Americas.
Exactly. And this is where the facade of total dominance really shatters. Despite the dominance of the colonizers, they were entirely dependent on indigenous botanical knowledge just to survive the local diseases, right?
Yes, exactly. European doctors arrived with their traditional texts mostly based on the theory of the four humors. So they're prescribing bloodletting and heavy wool blankets for brutal tropical fevers.
Which is a terrible idea in the Caribbean.
A disastrous idea. Their textbooks were completely useless, so they were forced into a desperate exchange of knowledge. The native Taino people understood the local pathology. They knew which local barks and resins, like guaiacum wood, could treat specific fevers.
It perfectly encapsulates that collision of two worlds you mentioned earlier.
It really does. It wasn't just a physical conquest, it was a forced, urgent exchange of knowledge born out of life or death necessity. Today, the ruins of San Nicolas de Bari are a silent reminder of that human struggle for survival.
But all this accumulated wealth, elegance, and rapid innovation, the monasteries, the first university, it painted a massive target on Santo Domingo's back, which leads us to a catastrophic turning point in 1586.
Yes, 1586, the arrival of the infamous English corsair Francis Drake.
We usually picture explorers as these romanticized figures, but looking at the sources, Francis Drake was operating essentially like a mob boss, extracting a brutal protection racket.
Oh, absolutely. He rolls up with a massive fleet and occupies the city for an entire month. He effectively takes it hostage.
And the ultimate disrespect, he didn't set up his headquarters in the military fort. He set up his command center right inside the very cathedral we just talked about.
The psychological terror of that cannot be overstated. He violated the safest, most sacred space in the hemisphere.
Right. And to pressure the city into paying a ransom, he systematically burns parts of the city block by block. He looted its treasures and shipped the wealth back to England. So what does this all mean? How does one pirate attack literally shift the center of gravity for an entire empire?
This raises an important question about the fragility of early colonial power, because the attack exposed a fatal flaw. Santo Domingo, despite its massive forts and its grid, was vulnerable. Defending an island from naval armadas requires an endless supply of ships and soldiers.
So the Spanish crown performs a cost-benefit analysis.
Exactly. They decided to pivot. They began prioritizing the extraction of riches from the massive, more defensible mainlands of Mexico and Peru. They left the Primata city in the background. Drake's attack changed the economic map of the world forever.
It's amazing how fast history pivots. But we need to bring this back to the present day, because despite the pirate sieges, earthquakes, and the passage of centuries, Santo Domingo never died.
No, it didn't. And thanks to a conscious 20th century restoration effort, it was saved from oblivion. It was declared a UNESCO World Heritage Site in 1990, recognized as a treasure not just for Dominicans, but for all of humanity.
And the sources are clear today. The Zona is a vibrant, dynamic, and colorful city. It is not a theme park.
Not at all. It is the foundation of an unprecedented human experiment where two previously unaware worlds collided. Every historic street is a reminder that the past is not something left behind, but the very foundation we stand and build upon today.
Which leaves me with a final thought for you, our listener, to mull over today. If the physical layout of our oldest cities was born out of hurricane survival and fear of pirate attacks, what invisible blueprints of fear, necessity, or forced innovation are currently shaping the modern digital spaces and new worlds we are building right now?
It's a fascinating parallel to think about.
It really is. So keep questioning the foundations you walk on every day. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive, and we'll see you next time.